So I want you to imagine this. You are in the US and you are at the airport. And then while waiting at the gate, you find this cute little doggo that is wrapped in American flag in a stroller. Something very, very American. Something you would probably expect. Nothing too shocking. So you move ahead. Yeah, not too bad. But then you go past the gate to your plane where you smell a whiff of something that you've never experienced before outside a horse stable. Something wet and hairy. You move past and then you see a little pony. Like a little pony inside a plane right there on the seat with a sweet, smiling lady holding its leash. Yep. Your heart sinks for a moment because there is an empty seat just beside it. And you kind of wish with all your heart that it's not your seat. But turns out that is exactly your seat. So you move there. The lady, however, is extremely friendly. I mean, she helps you move your stuff. At first, you are a little bit afraid of the pony, but it kind of appears harmless and then cute, and you sort of make your peace with it. So you sit there, and the lady starts talking to you about her life and her family, and, of course, the emotional support pony called Dexter. Time seems to fly by, and 2 hours later, you've not just reached your destination, but you have made friends with a pony and have been invited to a ranch in Kansas. This, just for a disclaimer, this is not true. This is entirely fictional, but it could easily happen in the US. But jokes aside, one of the biggest misconceptions about the USA is that it is one country with one culture, which is definitely not true at all. In fact, when I visited and traveled the US, I felt that it's easier to think of USA as a completely different world, completely different planet, with its own language and customs and norms. Anywhere from greeting strangers to drive through everything to emotional support animals, and even the way they deal with their healthcare is complete and utter surprise to the rest of the world. So please hitch a ride on my starship and let's fly to the wonderful new world of the United States of America. And we begin with point number 1, the American hello. One of the most interesting experiences in the US is actually greeting someone. First time it happened to me was when I was at a grocery store and the teller just said, "Hey, how are you?" First thing is that living in Northern Europe, I'm not accustomed to smile and being spoken to, so that took me with quite a surprise. But the second thing is that she didn't even look at me. There was no attention whatsoever. And for a moment I thought that maybe if she was speaking to me or not. So I took a pause and I wanted to answer, but then she had already moved on to the next customer. And I remember standing there mid-sentence. It felt like I had broken some invisible rule. Like my English isn't bad, and I felt that she must have thought that I don't understand English. But yeah, kind of embarrassing. But later that day, I was walking into a building with my host, who is also an immigrant and living in the USA for a while, and someone smiled at him and just said, "Hey, how are you?" And then without missing a single beat, without even looking, before he even blinked, he replied, "Good, how are you?" It just happened in microsecond. So like nobody even thought about it. It's like a knee-jerk reflex. And I realized that it's everywhere. Like it's in hallways, in shops, and in elevators, whether it is with strangers or you are with friends or you're with colleagues, it's always the same rhythm. How are you? Good, you, and then just keep walking. So I had to ask myself, like, where exactly does this come from? What exactly is the purpose of this? So let me dig deeper. Culturally, Americans are, very outgoing and friendly by their very nature, even to the stranger, even if you don't know them. But they have a very strong emphasis on personal boundaries and individualism. So how are you sort of became like a middle ground? I mean, it's like a friendly greeting without the weight of any emotional intimacy attached to it. I mean, you are sort of acknowledging someone, but you don't really ask them to open up. It's sort of like a modified form of hello. Technically, linguists call it phatic communication. It's the language that keeps social flow going without actually exchanging any meaning. And compared to other cultures, this is kind of crazy. Because in Germany or Japan, people don't just ask, "How are you?" unless they genuinely really want to know. Especially in Northern Europe, where I have spent majority of my adult life, this question can be nerve-wracking. Especially to a stranger. It can really make someone uncomfortable because it's not a greeting in Europe. It's like an existential question. It's a question that is better suited for your therapist. Because anytime somebody asks you, your whole life sort of flashes in front of your eyes and you have to ask like, "How am I doing?" Well, am I doing fine? Am I doing good? Yesterday was okay. Today is fine. Tomorrow could be terrible. So what do I answer? How can I put it in a word? But despite all of these things, the good thing about this is how uniform it all is. How approachable it makes everyone. I mean, you don't need to think. You don't need to gauge a person. It could be your boss, an old lady, a police officer, a bartender, a barista. You could just go ahead and then break the ice in one single sentence. No need to think. You just break the ice. Easy. But you see, in other cultures, that might be seen as superficial, for example, especially when it is accompanied with a smile, which might not always be genuine. And people would think, okay, this is phony, and why are they being extra friendly even if they don't know me? And the expectation is, of course, not really to know how I am really doing, because any answer other than good, it will probably shock the other person. So is it worth even a real answer? this brings me to the end of this point, and that is, how should you really respond? Well, the good news is that MIT, the famous university, actually prepares international students for this. They explain on their webpage is that the question "how are you" or "how is it going" just simply means hello and is meant as a greeting. There is no expectation for an answer. In fact, it would be odd if someone were to say anything more than just good or fine. Just don't take it personally. Person who really wants to know how you're doing will still greet you the same way, but they will also follow up with, "So how are you doing?" and actually pause for an answer. So there you go. On a personal note, I wonder how it would be if someone just asks me how am I doing, someone stranger of course, and then right on the beat, without skipping a beat, I just answer them, "Okay, yeah, I'm doing terrible, worst day of my life, how are you doing?" I wonder how they would react. Okay, point number 2, how normal is normal distance in the US? So I visited the US quite a bit, and the longer I stay there, the more something strange starts to happen. My threshold for what counts as far just keeps stretching. At first, when I do a 45-minute drive, it feels like, okay, this is a bit too much, but then it becomes normal just to, get dinner. And next thing I know, I'm driving 4 hours because there is a new restaurant that opened up. Maybe there is a sale going on and I don't want to miss it. It is only when you hit maybe like 6 or 8 hours that you actually start to think about driving. Before that, it's just normal. It's as normal as hopping across your street and getting a carton of milk. Yeah. And it almost feels like half the time whenever I am in the US, I'm sitting in the back of a car traveling somewhere. But you do notice something different here. And that is that I don't even think in miles or kilometers when I am in the US or talking about the distances there, because that is exactly how distance is measured in the US. Statistically, the average American drives about 15,000 miles per year, which is more than twice what people in Germany or France drive. And it's not just that they do like these road trips, but also that people regularly commute 40 or 50 or even 70 miles a day and still call it not that bad. 70 miles, by the way, is almost 110 kilometers. Yeah, so you know. So again, I want to dig deep into it and ask myself, why is this so common in the US? Why is driving associated with American culture so much? So part of it has to do with geography. The US is vast and sparsely populated. It has about 91 people per square mile. On the other hand, when we look at other countries such as France, which has about 300, and the UK, which is about 700. Now, all of these places have a pretty robust public transportation network, but with such high population density, it does really make sense. The US, on the other hand, had a problem where there weren't simply enough people to justify building public transport system across the whole country. So the US brought people together by heavily investing in highway networks, or interstates as they are called in the US. And once that infrastructure was in place, it just kept reinforcing itself. Not to mention that cheap gas and having drive-through everything made it so much easier. And then more importantly, I think there is this cultural layer, something we touched on a little bit earlier, the American ideal of freedom and individualism. Driving symbolizes independence and control and personal choice like public transport never ever can. The ability to go wherever and whenever on your own terms, stop wherever you want. There is nothing really quite like it. Even in Europe, where having a car is actually frowned upon, in general, it gives you the kind of freedom that is hard to deny, even with public transport. And I'm saying this from my own personal experience. But obviously, such reliance on personal driving comes with a lot of trade-offs. For example, the US has one of the highest road fatality rates in the developed world, simply because people spend so much time behind the wheel. In a year, in 2020, cars killed 42,000 people. That's 1 year. According to Walks, driving kills as many Americans each year as guns do. Yeah, but you don't hear it being talked about so much. Then there is also the environmental cost. The transportation is one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the country, and that is why you see carpool lanes, which is again something that is very uniquely North American. And then of course there is the daily experience. In many suburbs, you really can't walk to anything. There are no sidewalks. There are no like bike lanes. Even getting like a carton of milk means that you have to start your car and just drive to the grocery store. Compare that to Europe, for example, where, like gas and parking fee along with car taxes, they strongly discourage the usage of cars for anything less than essential travel. So yeah, there you have it. By the way, this reminds me of a really good quote that I read on the internet, and that is that in Europe, 100 miles is a long distance. In America, 100 years is a long time. Point number 3, and that is your job defines your identity. So earlier we talked about how in the US, how are you isn't really just a question. It's just a polite form form of hello. But you know that there is one question that if someone asks you, you know very well that the person is actually interested in you. And that question is, of course, what do you do? This isn't just small talk or just being polite. People actually use it to measure you, to place you, and to decide how seriously to take you. Because in the US, your job is who you are. But you know, the irony here is the wild part of that revelation is that for something so central to your identity, you can lose it in a single day. No warning, no cause, and no safety net. So yeah, what exactly is going on here? What do I mean by that? I mean, your job can almost determine your survival in the US. Your job determines whether you have health insurance because, of course, there is no universal healthcare system for residents or citizens in the United States. It also affects whether you can rent an apartment or qualify for a mortgage because in the US, proof of employment often stands in for trust. So if you don't have a job, it's not just your income at risk, it's your housing, it's your healthcare, and often reputation. For something so important and central, most of the US employment is called at will. That means that your boss can let you go tomorrow for any reason or no reason at all, and that's it. Nearly 47% of American workers say that they have been fired without fair cause at least once, and that's nearly half the workforce. The US is essentially an outlier in the modern world. It is the only affluent nation in the world where you can introduce yourself with pride with your job one day and be jobless the next minimal effort. So where exactly does this come from? And I want you to understand exactly where that has come from. So culturally, the US was built on a Protestant work ethic, which means that the belief that success is earned and that what you do reflects who you are. Compare that to Europe, for example, where status was inherited. America said that you have to earn it. So you have to work hard and you have to achieve, you have to climb, and your job title will show what you're worth. Legally, things went in a different direction. In the late 1800s, US courts adopted the at-will employment doctrine, which meaning that either side could end the relationship at any time. And then in the 20th century, Supreme Court had some cases that struck down worker protections. So on one hand, while Europe was building safety nets, the US, on the other hand, was reinforcing employer flexibility. Today, it is at a stage where Montana is the only US state that requires just cause for termination, that is after probation. So everywhere else, you can be fired by email. And in 2023, recently, that is exactly what happened to thousands of tech workers, some after even 15 or 20 years at the same company. Google's CEO emailed more than 12,000 employees about their termination and even acknowledged that outside the US, the process would take longer due to local laws, sort of implying that US workers were let go immediately, whereas Europeans would go through a process. But while I say this, I also want to footnote this by saying that on average, a US tech worker earns twice as much as the person in the EU for the same rank and experience. So do keep that in mind. So why do people accept that? Why has it come to be that way? Don't people like protest or don't people want it if it's so bad? Because the thing is that despite the drawbacks, the system promises freedom in return. You know, the same thing that we keep coming back to again and again, the US idea of freedom and individualism. If employers can fire easily, workers can leave just as fast. I mean, 2 weeks notice is standard, but really not required. Americans change job more often than almost anything else. And they really take pride in, bouncing back and pivoting and reinventing. It's almost become a cliche where people tell about how they got fired and then they bounced back and believed in themselves and now they're much more fulfilled in a much better paying job or, started a business of their own, kind of like a fairy tale, like a capitalist fairy tale. On the other hand, the benefit for the labor market and the companies is that it can be quite fast and flexible. Companies can hire really quickly, build up, and they can scale on just as fast if they want. But despite the freedom that it gives, it creates kind of a lot of anxiety because knowing that they can be let go so easily, people really try to overcompensate to make themselves irreplaceable. People overwork, people skip vacations, they hesitate to call in sick, and all of that is happening not because they love their jobs, but because they're too afraid to lose it. And yeah, it's true, they can lose it anytime. In many European countries, firings often require formal processes, documentation, months of notice, and then severance, and then union involvement, which makes it quite a predicament. On top of it, you have safety nets, for example, which mean that you will have the same health insurance, and of course, unemployment insurance that will allow you to do okay in the time that you are jobless. I mean, you will not die of starvation, you will not miss your mortgage or your rent, or die horribly because you don't have health insurance. But in the US, the craziest thing is to work at a place for 20 years and then receive an email at midnight saying that you are let go of your job, your entry pass is revoked and then your stuff will be shipped to you. Imagine working at a place for 20 years not knowing that this can be your last day, any day. Point number 4. Okay, so let's lighten the tone a bit. So remember the intro incident that I mentioned about a pony? Well, that is something true. For the longest time till 2021, American Airlines allowed emotional support animals inside airplanes. Now, what exactly are ESAs and how exactly did they get to a point where you can carry your pet alligator beside you in the airplane? I'm not joking. Let's talk about it. Okay, so what exactly is an ESA? An emotional support animal is kind of different from a service animal. A service animal is typically a highly trained dog that can perform specific tasks for someone with a physical or psychiatric disability, like for example, guiding a blind person. An ESA, on the other hand, doesn't need training. It doesn't perform any task. It's simply there to provide comfort, and usually for anxiety or depression or PTSD or similar conditions. Any pet can be an ESA. If a licensed mental health provider writes a note saying, then yeah, it can be anything. It can include dogs or cats or rabbits and even pigs or peacocks or of course ponies. So how does this happen exactly? So it starts with the American law. There is this law called the Fair Housing Act that requires landlords to accommodate ESAs even in no-pet buildings as a reasonable accommodation for emotional or psychological disability. So if a tenant provides a letter from a licensed mental health professional, landlords are legally obligated to allow the animal without charging pet fee. Number 2 is the Air Carrier Access Act until its revision in 2021. It also required airlines to treat ESAs like service animals. All you needed was just a note from a therapist and people could bring their support animals into the cabin, like free of charge. Just no standard pet restrictions or fees. All that you needed was a therapist letter. That's it. Your emotional support dog might calm your nerves on a plane, but what if it causes anxiety for the person sitting next to you? Like, how is that fair? That, I think, is the irony of the individual freedom. Like, where does one person's comfort end and another's discomfort begins? I think this tension lies at the heart of the American experiment. It is a culture that is built on strong individual freedom that sometimes stretches boundaries to really absurd extremes. And we see that in its most glaring detail in the American healthcare system, which is the final point. Point number 5, the cost of staying alive, American healthcare. So imagine this, you're visiting the US, you're walking down a subway staircase and the person next to you slips and lands hard. You hear a scream and their ankle is like bent and you can see that the person is really hurt. So you rush in and ask if they're okay and then you take out your phone to call 911 and then you see that their eyes widen in fear and they tell you to not call the ambulance. And in that split second you sort of realize where you are. You are in the United States because calling an ambulance might cost you $1,000 US. A single dose of a drug might set you back like 5,000, and something as basic as childbirth, for example, that can cost you about $30,000 without insurance. But yeah, you might ask, well, what if you do have insurance? Even if you have insurance, you're not exactly safe because it is so complicated. It's like navigating a minefield. Let's say that your insurance plan has a 5,000 deductible and then covers 80% of the rest. If your hospital bill is 30,000, for example, this is how this plays out. You pay the first 5,000, which is your deductible, that leaves 25,000, the rest of the bill, and you are responsible for the 20% of the rest, which is 5,000 more. So altogether, you still end up paying 10,000 out of pocket, and you have insurance. And that is what you do know. The worst thing is that for the majority of times, you might not even know what you will be charged. Imagine if you are in an emergency and you need a helicopter ride. Some insurance might cover it, some part of it might not be covered, and even just for the helicopter ride, you might end up paying $50,000 US, and you don't know if it might happen anytime. time, and that is considered completely normal. It is no wonder that almost 4 in 10 American adults carry some form of medical debt, and medical emergencies are the leading cause of personal bankruptcies in the USA. It is so bad that GoFundMe, yes, the crowdfunding website GoFundMe, has basically become part of the healthcare system. Their CEO even said that a huge portion of campaigns are for medical bills. People are literally begging strangers to help them pay for treatment. So like everything, I want to dig deeper and I want to understand how did this happen. But American healthcare is so complicated that I can just give you like a basic overview. Very simplified summary. So after the World War II, during which the companies weren't allowed to raise wages in the USA, they started offering health insurance as a perk to attract more employees. And that sort of stuck. Later in the 1940s, there was an attempt by President Truman who tried to introduce universal healthcare. That really got shut down and because it was labeled socialized medicine. And after that, the USA just doubled down on the private route. So insurance companies, big pharma, private hospitals, doctors, lobbies, all of them built a system that just makes a lot of people very rich, gives a lot of incentive to not have any universal healthcare. So yeah, there is now this patchwork. There's job-based insurance for some, there's Medicare for seniors, there's Medicaid for a few, and there are a whole bunch of people who are just falling through the cracks. Hospitals can charge what they want, insurers can negotiate in secret here and there, and if you're uninsured or even just out of network, you get hit with the fullest price, which is why a basic MRI might cost privately $3,000 in the US and $300 in France, even if it's privately done. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I mean, the system is pretty bad. But like everything else that I've mentioned in this video, I want to look at things in a way that maybe there's something positive out of it. Like there is something good about it. And is there anything good about the system, the healthcare system of the United States? Weirdly, yeah, there is something. And that is the US market is so profitable that it attracts the world top talent. I mean, doctors and researchers, and they come here, they pass brutal exams, and then they work for huge salaries. Secondly, because there's so much money in the sector, it drives a lot of innovation. And there are new drugs, new therapies, cancer treatments, clinical trials. The US is often where they start, which means that diseases can be detected early on and you can live well. So if you have money or a really, really, really good insurance, you can really access some of the best healthcare in the world. But that again is a very, very huge if. The irony here is that US spends more per person on healthcare than any other country in the world, and yet it still leaves people bankrupt. 40% of Americans put off medical treatment because they are afraid of the cost. People skip doctor visits, delay cancer screenings, ration their insulin. There was a Yale study that found that 1 in 4 diabetics were cutting back on insulin because they couldn't afford it. That's not a remote village in India or like sub-Saharan Africa. That's here, one of the wealthiest and most powerful countries in the world, where people are skipping on insulin because they can't afford it. And the irony here is, and the worst part of it is that you would expect if the USA is spending so much on healthcare, you would have a pretty good life expectancy, right? The life expectancy in the US is 76 years. The average in other rich countries is 82. It's like you're paying for a Cadillac and getting a Chevy in return. So anyway, yeah, it's a pretty bleak thing, but I don't really want to end on that. So if you're still here and still watching, I want to share something that is very, very uniquely American and that I've seen in probably no other culture. And that is, I think Americans are unique in a way that they have the ability to laugh at themselves, to take a joke, to criticize themselves and take criticism. I don't think that is like a very, very common thing. There are cultures where they can't take criticism. Majority of the cultures can't take criticism. Majority of countries can't take criticism. But to be able to do that and to take criticism and to be able to laugh at yourself, I think that is one thing that makes Americans so friendly and actually so endearing. And I think that is one of the reasons why I've had so much fun with Americans, no matter where I meet them, whether in Europe or in the US. It's like you are never really a stranger. You're never an outsider. I really can't think of any other culture that can take a joke so openly, except maybe Germans. But the thing is that you need to get them drunk first. But anyway, thank you for watching. If you're still here after all this while, I wish you the best. Stay safe, stay healthy, hug your loved ones, and I will see you next time. Take care.